Hello all, Rajan here. Uh, Today's session is more about how do we create better products, uh, where we fall behind, and what is that paradigm shift that we are looking at in terms of how to create a product. So, how do we start, right? When we start creating a product, we have an idea, and that idea is being shortlisted, and then we have that as an hypothesis, and then we try to develop a product. And more focus was given on, say, for per se, in terms of high level of planning or kind of tight governance. But we live in a kind of a uncertain world where things keep on changing and it's fluid. So this kind of high level planning, detailed planning, or kind of tight governance might not help us in creating a better product. So today's discussion is all about what are the alternatives for a kind of high detailed planning, how to make a better product as such. So that's the discussion that we are going to talk about or discuss about today. All right. So the agenda of this session is about why do products fail? Where is the kind of a starting point of how do I kickstart a product? And we would discuss about the lean startup methodology, and we would discuss about the lean measure, build, measure life cycle, and what is the takeaway from the session all about of if I need to create a good product, a better product, what would be my kind of best practices that we need to follow. So that's the quick agenda of this session today. So the first thing that I would like to discuss, and please interrupt me wherever you want. Let's pause. Let's have discussions, more of discussions. So wherever you feel that you have any queries or you have your own observations, feel free to stop me and let's have a discussion about it. So the first thing that what we are trying to discuss is why do products actually fail? One reason could be is that we really don't know what is the problem that we are trying to attack. Are we really trying to solve a problem? That's why we have a product, right? That's the point. Take, for example, Airbnb. Airbnb is a kind of a platform where any traveler could try to get an accommodation from the host. But what was his problem all about was the accommodations were of high tariffs. So as a traveler, I wanted to make sure that the accommodation is a kind of affordable accommodation. So Airbnb thought that, okay, already there are kind of hosts who can let out their property and save some amount, get some amount. Meantime, there is a traveler around here who tries to have a kind of a homestay rather than a kind of an hotel stay, and he gets an affordable rate. So there was a kind of a win-win situation, but both for the host and the guests. And Airbnb tried to solve that problem. So whenever we have a kind of a create a product, we first need to identify what problem are we trying to solve, and are we really trying to solve that problem. So should be the first starting point. And most of the times, we really don't know why we create the product, and we really don't know what problem we are trying to solve all about. The second proposition is more about value proposition and differentiation. Am I able to sell my idea that you have a problem and I am trying to solve that problem through the solution from this product? So am I able to sell the idea first to the customer is what we are talking about. Airbnb typically took care of that. It was able to sell that, look, if you have a house, you can let out a part of it, earn some money out of it. And if you are a traveler, yes, you don't have to pay hefty amounts in terms of tariffs to a hotel owner. Rather, use these kind of hosts, make sure that you be a paying guest and have a affordable stay here. So that was the value proposition that Airbnb thought about, and it was trying to sell that idea, and it got succeeded in it too. And the other proposition is all about we are trying to make a product, right? Are we trying to do a kind of overbuilding, or it's a kind of under engineering? So these two are kind of two extremes. You may have a product which is being used by very less people. In that case, I don't need to worry about my scalability. I don't need to worry about my performance. My volumes are going to be less. So it's going to be a less number of users who are going to use my product. In that case, just have the right amount of architecture, right amount of requirements that are needed. You first try to come out with an MVP. For that MVP, I don't need to have all the requirements in my plate. Try to handle that as so. Any kind of extra features is a kind of a waste. Any kind of extra architecture that we build around the system is a kind of a waste. That's the point that I'm trying to say here. The, the other one is kind of ways of working. Focus on more about outcomes, focus on more about the near ones in terms of planning. So you have a planning, so don't try to make you sure that you have a perfect plan. We are not looking at a perfect plan. Look at the near ones, try to see how detailed it could be, and it need not be a perfect one. And the product evolves over time and evolves over the plan, right? So focus on the near one plans and keep it kind of fluid for the farther plans. That's the idea. And it's not about completing a particular feature. It's not about completing a task. It's not completing it on time, but rather looking at outcomes. How many people have logged into my product? How many people have registered to my product? How many people are trying to visit my site? So these kind of outcomes is what we got to look at and kind of measure rather than whether I have completed it on time or on cost. That's the focus here. So these are some kind of factors why we actually fail as a product. So quickly moving on, I need to have a starting point, right? So where do I start? Any product for that matter needs to have a vision. Look at the visions of Airbnb and Uber, rights. Uh, it needs to be a kind of an aspirational statement of why my product really exists, right? So as a company or as a product, what am I going to work on for the next 5 years, next 10 years is my kind of a vision statement, which is more about kind of aspirational statements that what we are looking at. All right. I have a kind of an aspirational statement that I need to work on in terms of the next 5 years or next 10 years, but that's not enough. There needs to be some kind of a roadmap for that vision to be realized, right? So that is where strategy comes into place. So strategy is more about a kind of a pathway of a roadmap of how am I going to implement the vision statement. Uh, we talk about who's going to be my customer segments. What age group do they belong to? What region do they belong to? So you were trying to learn about the customer, who's actually going to be my customer, who's going to use that. Have some kind of a roadmap of okay, for this is quarter one, I am trying to focus on these three features. For the next quarter, I'm trying to focus on the other four sets of features. So you have some kind of a roadmap of how my product is going to evolve. Is it going to be a kind of an app store where I can download my app and then try to do, or it is going to be an enterprise edition? How is my revenue stream going to be? Is it going to be a recurring subscription model or it's going to be a one-time payment? Who are my competitors? What are my strengths? What are my limitations? So you focus more about my product and how am I going to measure that success? So this strategy is all about a kind of a game plan of how I'm going to realize my vision. Once you have that game plan of strategy, then you start developing or evolving the product. Most importantly, all that we need to keep it in mind is vision is something that cannot be changed. Strategies may change here and there. I may look at a particular customer segment today. Say, for example, they are kind of Gen Z customers. Then maybe I try to do a kind of a course correction and change my customer segment. So it could be somebody else all to that together. So strategies might change, but the vision never changes. But more importantly, more than the strategy, all that we are trying to look at, products needs to change, it needs to evolve, and we are not trying to kind of develop a product which is kind of a full set product. We are trying to do it iteratively, we're trying to do it incrementally. So the point that I'm trying to look at is any product needs to have a vision. And that vision should have some kind of a strategic plan of who's going to be my customer, what is the roadmap, how is my going to be my revenue stream, how am I going to measure my success as a product. All that kind of strategy plannings are going to be there after the vision, and that might change. But more importantly, the product keeps evolving, the product keeps changing altogether. And the vision is something that is sacrosanct, where it never changes. Strategy would change, product would be. So any questions here till now, so that we'll pass on. All right. So I have a vision now. We have a strategy, and we start developing products, right? So it's an idea, right? We start with an idea. It's the simplest form of an idea that we start, and then we try to evolve. I would like to share the Uber way of how they became a product company. So, believe me, Uber had only 3 cabs in their fleet, and they did not have any kind of fancy apps down that time. But they just had an idea. It was an assumption, it was an hypothesis that people would rent a cab. First, they would need to validate that assumption or hypothesis whether people would hire a cab. That was the first statement that what they were looking at. So just they had 3 cabs. They did not have any app for that matter. People would call them up, book the cab, use their cab. All that is what they were trying to test first. And then they went to the next step. Okay, now let's create some kind of an app so that they have an interaction. They started with one region called San Francisco, is where they first started their cab service. Today, they are worldwide, right? So the point here is any idea that comes in first needs to be tested, validated, and then you start evolving, start incrementing, start iterating, and then we move ahead. So that's how product gets evolved, right? So the point here that see this right picture, right, where you have a picture, right? You first have a learn. You have an idea, and that idea is being put to test. That needs to be built, and that built MVP is trying to get validated or measured, and then it's a kind of a cycle. So each time an idea is being put to test, there is a kind of an MVP that revolves, and that's being measured, and it's a kind of an iterative incremental cycle. So all that we are trying to look at differently in this product development is, what am I going to measure here? Is it time? Is it cost? Or is it a kind of a feature completion? No. It's about learning. Learning is the measurement unit for any of these product developments. What am I going to learn from as a team is, I am going to learn about the customer. I have an idea. I am trying to put that idea to test, trying to learn whether the customer likes those ideas, trying to learn more about the customer, trying to understand, is there somebody who's going to use my product? So that's all that. If there is some kind of learning that happens during this cycle, is what we are trying to measure, rather than a kind of feature completions or in terms of task or in terms of cost. So the measuring unit is all about learning about the customer is the focus in any of the product developments. The second thing that what is kind of a paradigm shift here from this right diagram is how quickly I am going through this one cycle. I need to come out with an idea, build, try to measure it, try to learn. So how quickly I move through this one circle is all the focus here. That's all that we are trying to look at. So the shift here is, one is the learning, and how quickly I move through these 3 life cycles is what we are talking about. You have an idea, you quickly move that to an MVP, test that up, measure that up, know more about the customer, try to make an increment, try to make an iteration, and move ahead. So that is all that we are trying to look about. TurboTax. TurboTax is a kind of an tool that is being used worldwide where they try to file their income tax returns. When they first started this tool, the assumption that they had was every customer had a desktop machine, they had a printer. All that they have to do is take a printout of their W-2 tax form and post it to the TurboTax team. That was the first exercise that the TurboTax tried to do. What they learned about the customer was they had a desktop, they had a printer, but they had problems taking a printout of that income tax return W-2 form. Either the printer was not working or the customer did not know how to operate the printer. Any of these two. So they learned about the customer. Okay, there was a kind of a gap here. So what do I change here? Instead of taking a printout, the TurboTax team thought, okay, why don't they take a snap of the W-2 income tax form and just share it to them? They did it. So once they shared that form, they first started to do a kind of an iterative kind of way of working where they were trying to file some kind of simple returns. They started filing returns. Then they went to a complex return. They started with one region called California. Only within that region, they were trying to test their waters and they were trying to learn about the customer. Each time they went through these cycles, they learned something and they were able to produce some value to the customer. That's the point that what I'm trying to talk about. The TurboTax founders said, when we move towards this lean startup methodology, earlier what happened was we had one big rollout of deployment that would happen before the tax season comes. They would have one shipment of software and the customers would use it. But once they started moving towards this lean startup methodology was, what is the change that what he saw was, instead of making one big rollout of deployment, what happens now is the team started trying to test their concepts, their experiments. Every week around 50 to 100 tests were done, 100 deployments were done. And it was all kind of small improvements that were happening. But each day they were trying to learn about the customer. Each day they were trying to increase the value of the product. And each day they were trying to solve the customer problem, inching towards the customer's needs. So that's the point that I wanted to emphasize. That's the shift that we are looking at, where it's not about the cost, it's not about the time, it's not about the feature completion, but did we know more about the customer? Did we understand the customer's problem? And are we trying to solve their problem is the focus here. And how quickly I move within these three cycles is all that we are talking about. So that's the shift of this lean startup methodology, right? So we have three parts here. One is the learning, the other is the actual build, and the next is the measure. So we're going to look at each of this and try to see what is the shift that we are making rather than a kind of a normal software development cycle. IMVU, it's a company, it's a social platform where what happens here is that I can create an avatar. Avatar is nothing but a kind of a fictional character that evolves, and I can create my own avatar, socialize, be in a kind of a virtual world, and then try to explore, talk to different people, chat with different people in a virtual world. That's the platform that IMView tried to create. So before getting into how IMView started this lean startup methodology, I'm just going to run a quick 2 minutes video of what is this IMV all about, is all about. So let's quickly look into this video. That's it. So it's a quick 2 minutes video of what this IMB is all about, right? So where I can create my own fictional character, do a kind of a 3D chat, socialize, and it's more about a kind of a we are in a virtual world. That's the whole point. That's the platform that they try to create. So when they started creating, what did they learn from the customer is what that we are trying to look at. We are first looking at the first part of the cycle is about the lean startup methodology of learn, right? So they wanted to create a 3D chat, right? Already there were kind of top leaders, top three leaders in IM network. So what was their thing? Already there was WhatsApp, there was WeChat, there was Facebook Messenger. So they were kind of almost percent of the market. So the IMV team thought it wouldn't be a kind of a wise decision to start another IM network and compete with the kind of a player like WhatsApp or WeChat. Rather, they thought, let's kind of have an add-on functionality where that can work on top of WhatsApp or WeChat or Telegram. So they thought they will not be able to compete as an IM Messenger, IM network with WhatsApp kind of stuff, people. Rather, come out with a kind of an add-on functionality product which can work on top of any of these IM networks. That was their assumption first. They started creating it. And they thought that they had a kind of a feature where kind of interportability, where if I am in WhatsApp, I can message a guy who is not in a WhatsApp account, but say, for example, he is in a Telegram account. So they thought this is a kind of a cool feature where the customers would love this feature, where I don't have my friend in WhatsApp account, but that guy is using a kind of a Telegram. And whatever messages that I type in would get transmitted to a Telegram kind of contact. That was their functionality. They thought that kind of a cool feature that they would try to is a kind of a selling point. So they started creating that. And they took around 6 months. They did a kind of a normal kind of SDLC cycle. It was a kind of an agile cycle too, but it was not a kind of a lean startup methodology kind of concept. So their intention was I would not be able to compete as an IM network. I will have to compete as an add on. And I had a cool feature where I was able to communicate with a different IM messenger altogether. They thought that is a kind of a cool feature everybody would love. There were hundreds of conversations for the next 6 months of what feature needs to be included, what feature needs to be excluded. And after the sixth month, they completed, gave a first release. IMB team gave a first release. Surprisingly, there were no downloads, no app downloads, zero number of users. The observation or inference is no matter how much time we took arguing of feature should be in, which feature should be out, which would be liked by the customer, we had hundreds of conversations. All that is considered as waste because these are kind of an hypothesis, an assumption. But in reality, that did not happen. So they tried to slightly make changes to it and said, okay, it's a team, right? So the team had a family, friends. What they did was, let's have a target. Every week, there should be at least kind of 50 kind of logged in registers to this app or this product, right? So they begged, they paid to their family, friends, the canvassing, why don't you guys download this app or kind of a product? It worked, right? But beyond a point, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, the number of users again uh, came down. So what do we do? No, but there were no kind of observations. There was nobody even to say that this product is a dumb product. We didn't like that product. No, there is no feedback, no observations altogether. So one kind of shift they did was, okay, let's pay some users for an hour and ask them to sit in our office and then try to observe their behaviors of what do they like about the product or what they do not like about the product. So their first paid user was a kind of a 17-year girl who was tech savvy. They paid her for 1 hour and they asked them to come to their office, and they gave her them the app to download. She started doing it. She started loving the product, creating her own avatar, trying to make up what are all the costumes that she would like to have. Then the IMV team tried to nudge the user, asking them, okay, now you have created a avatar. Why don't you start connecting with your friends who are already using it? But she said a big no. That was something surprising to the IMV team. The IMV team thought that once they would like the product, they will try to canvas it to the other users. But surprisingly, that was not the case. So the point that what they learned about the customer was that the customer should feel confident about the product to them first. Once they are confident, then they will try to canvas to the other users or their friends. So when they were started talking to different paid users, this was the language that they heard was no, I will not try to recommend it to a friend. So that was the kind of observation that they got. Okay, so based on these observations, what they did was instead of kind of a networking kind of app, they tried to traverse it to a single player mode where you were able to create an avatar, dress up yourself, you dance, play, whatever it is. They came out with a single player mode version. That worked till a point. There was some number of increase in number of users after doing this change. But beyond the point again, it was kind of a dead end. What do I do after I create an avatar? At the end, I should start interacting with people, right? So one observation that what they learned about the customer was the customer was happy to engage with a stranger rather than with a known friend. So they came out with a concept called a simple button called chat now. And the same time when two people try to click on that chat now button, they will start interacting. So if I am going to click now at the same time there is somebody else who is going to click that chat now button, we would start interacting together. So this was kind of catchy to people. They started liking it. Now they started interacting. It was a kind of a 3D chat. They are trying to converse, make friends, all that stuff. But at no point they tried to interact with known friends already. They were comfortable talking to strangers, comfortable contributing or kind of engaging with a stranger rather than talking to an existing friend. So that was the observation or what they learned about the customer. Now, the same customer complained saying, look, it's a kind of a add-on that you have developed. Why don't you guys develop a new chat altogether, a new kind of IM network, just like WhatsApp or Telegram or WeChat? We are comfortable working on it. So the point that I'm trying to make here is the IMV team had some assumptions. They thought we had the best cool feature all around. They already have friends, they'll be able to make it up. But all their assumptions were broken. So just IMV team tried to evolve this product because of whatever was their assumption, they tried to put that to test quickly and try to learn about the customer. And they did a kind of a course correction to that product, and the customer started loving the product. So each time they had an assumption, that assumption was broken and they came out with a different observation and they evolved that as a product. So look at this. What did the team learn all about was the IMB team thought it is not worthwhile to have a separate IM just like WhatsApp, a full-fledged IM platform, but the customer rejected it. Customer wanted a find of a full-fledged and not an add-on kind of functionality. The IMVU team thought one WhatsApp by connecting to an Telegram guy was a kind of a cool feature, but that feature was rejected altogether. They did not like. IMVU team thought it would be great to focus on existing friends, but they thought that's not a cool idea. They wanted to make new friends. They wanted to talk to strangers. So it was a kind of a virtual world, and they thought it is better to engage with the stranger rather than a friend. That was the whole psychic of this mentality. So each time they had a plan or they had a strategy that was broken off and that was dismantled. So that's the point here is there's no point having a kind of a long-term plan and then trying to vet that plan, talk about which feature needs to be included. So the best way would be, or the best way of measuring a team's progress would be of how far I have learned about the customer is the point here that we are talking about. And this is the way of how IMVU team try to evolve their product. So how did they measure their progress? They measured their progress with the learning that they got with the customer. And more importantly, these were all kind of validated learnings. That is, any MVP or any experiment that we are trying to put to test is considered an assumption. It's just an hypothesis. It may work or it may not work. So you put that to test, get the customer inference. So whatever that you get out of that learning is considered as a validated learning where it's the gospel truth about the customer. So this validated learning is what we are looking at to measure progress. Is the customer trying to use my product? Am I going in the right direction? Is that kind of a sustainable way of evolving the product? Is more about this learning. And believe me, the learning is not about whether the team had learned about a particular technology or the team had learned about a particular design. That's not the focus here. The focus here is, did I learn about the customer? Is the focus or is the point that we are trying to focus here? All right. Any questions till now? All right. So how do I learn? I need to do some kind of an MVP or some kind of an experiment, right? So experiment is all about alchemy to science. That is, it's a kind of an evidence-based approach. It's not a kind of a guesswork, right? I assume something, it should work. Let's go ahead and make sure that it works. That's not the point. So the experiment that we do is a kind of an evident kind of approach where we try to learn about the customer. And let's take, for example, Zappos. Okay, Zappos is a kind of a online retail outlet where people would buy shoes, apparels, and all that stuff. Uh, Zappos, when they started this product, the founder was really skeptical whether there would be a customer really liking to buy a shoe online rather than going to a store, feeling it, trying to fit that size, and then buying it. So he was very kind of skeptical about it. So when he started doing it, believe me, he did not create any kind of product. So his first hypothesis is, or his first assumption was, his first question in his mind was, will a customer really buy a product online, typically a shoe? So he did not waste time in creating some kind of an MVP there, coming out with a product, then trying to test it out. So the first test was he went to a uh, uh, local store, and then took a picture of all the shoes, and then he tried to upload those photos online, and he was just trying to test the waters. Would there be any kind of customer who would love to buy that? Once somebody orders that, what he would do is he'll again go back to that store, buy that, and courier it to that guy. So that's all he did. He did not have any kind of systems in place. He did not worry about kind of an app that needs to be developed, all that stuff. But his first question was, will the customer buy the product online? That was his first assumption or first question that he wanted to get answers out of it. So the point that we are trying to look at is it's a kind of an iterative increment way of doing, and the experiment is more about trying to validate my assumptions. And it's again a kind of an, at the end, experiment is nothing but a product. So you try to do it iteratively, try to do it incrementally, and the product is something that is evolving. So the first assumption that what Zappos founder came about was, will the customer buy it online? Then what he did was he started bringing in typical kind of payment systems. Payment systems started work. So the next cycle that what he were talking was, if somebody returns that particular shoe, what will happen? Then he talked about discounts. He started learning about the customer behavior patterns about discounts, return policy. Then he had his own kind of stores where people would buy those online. But he did not start it with an kind of an develop an online app or develop a kind of a store where people would be able to buy it. So each time he had an assumption and he put that to test and he tried to validate that. That's the point. So experiment is all about a quick way of finding out whether my assumption is going to work or not, and what am I getting out of it is all about. One is the value. Is there any value to the customer? How many people are actually trying to buy my product? Is it going to be sustainable? Are there kind of repeat customers? Are there kind of new customers who are coming in over time? Is all that we are looking at kind of a growth perspective. So at the end, experiment is all about a quick way of finding whether an assumption would work, is all the focus here. And is the customer really loving my product is what we are looking at. So whatever learning that what we get either comes from an experiment or an MVP. An MVP is a kind of an full-fledged flavor, but experiment is a kind of a quick way of finding out, which doesn't, it's not going to take much of your time, but it's a quick way of finding out the pulse of the customer. That's the point here. And believe me, Zappos became a kind of a 1 billion company and Amazon bought that company. But they first started with the question, will the customer buy it online? And they did not have any fancy apps. They did not have any kind of fancy online stores. All that what he did was take a picture of from a local store, upload that picture, see whether somebody is trying to buy it. And each time he did a kind of an iteration and an increment of a value delivery. That what we are talking about. And the experiment helped him to learn about the customer is the focus here. So we talked about experiments. Experiment is all about a quick way of finding, but we need a kind of a complete product what the customer would look like. So we're talking about an MVP. The second circle that what we were looking at, right? So we all know that any plan is a kind of an assumption, and that assumption needs to be put to test. When do we put that to test is when that kind of an assumption is not, we don't, it's something new, right? Say, for example, Walkman. Before Walkman got introduced, there was no concept where the observers wanted to hear music on the move, right? Only when Walkman came, we started doing that. Customers would love listen to music on the move. That's something that is a concept or an observation for which I don't need to create an experiment or I don't need to create an MVP. We pretty much know that customers love listening to music on the move, either running, walking, whatever they do, they try to listen to music. It's quite okay for that. So that we call that as analogs, where you already have a history and you really don't need to test that waters. But there would be some kind of a new concept where we really don't know whether the customer would love to do it or not. Take the same music. All the time, people never paid money to listen to music. There was nothing like a subscription where you gave some money, and then started listening to. Napster had that kind of an idea where there was a subscription model. People would pay for listening to music. So that was something new. So for that, we need to do a kind of an experiment or an MVP. So that's the point here is, when do we need to go for these experiments or MVPs is when we are trying to test it in new waters. It's kind of going to be a new concept. Then we try to test that. If we already have a kind of an history to that, then we don't need to test it up. Say, for example, Facebook, right? It all started in university, in the university that the Facebook founder started using that in universities, and the college students loved it. Slowly, it tried to move to other universities. They did not have any kind of fancy plans or things, right? So, what was the measurement that they took that Facebook was a hit was? How many people visited that site? The metric that what they saw was, if there was some 100 people trying to visit that site, more than 60 or 70% of the visited that site again the same day. That was the metric or observation they thought was something very surprising. They came in, they came out, and the amount of time they were in this particular product was humongous. So this was a kind of a metric that what they saw was giving value to the customer or giving value to the product. So everything is a kind of an faith unless and until we put that to practice or put that to test. So the point here again is, it's a kind of an assumption. For some assumptions, we don't need to really test the waters because we already have an history of people. We know, we have learned about the customer. But there are some observations where we got to learn new observations about the customer. For those kind of ideas, we'll have to test that up either using an experiment or an MVP. MVP would be a kind of a full-fledged kind of product where the customer would have a kind of a feel. But experiment is more about, we are trying to test one particular aspect of it, and it's a kind of a quick one, and it need not be a kind of a full-fledged product. So that's the point. There are multiple kind of ways of how we create an MVP. The typical MVP that what we all know is, we develop softwares, right? So we develop a software, we will work for an iteration or a short period of time, and then we demonstrate that particular feature. That's one way of looking at an MVP. That's not the end to it. Believe me, how Dropbox came into existence. Dropbox did not write a single code. They just had an idea. They created a video around that idea, and they tried to sell that idea to people to simply check whether the people will is loving that product. So all that Dropbox did was, you had a file, that file needs to be shared. There are multiple devices, put it on cloud. You make changes to that file, that will get reflected to the other devices. So I do it, I make some changes to my photo in my desktop. That photo gets changed and that gets reflected in my mobile phone. That's all that they did. They put it on cloud. But they did not talk about it on a technical way. They tried to sell their idea. They did not write a single piece of code or single line of code. Their first assumption was, will the customer buy this idea? Will the customer buy this product? So the Dropbox founder came out with a kind of a 3-minute video of what this tool or what this product is doing about. And at the end of this video, he gave up a link saying, if you're interested to look at this product, just click on that link for a trial version. So he wanted to look at how many number of people who have clicked that link to say that they're interested to look at the trial version is what he was trying to look at, right? So he created a 3-minute video. I just wanted to play that 2 minutes video now to just make you understand that an MVP need not always be a kind of a developed code, a developed feature, or a developed product where people start using it and giving you feedbacks. It could be of any form, even like a video. So I'm just trying to play this video. Just have a look at it.
You've been there. You're about to buy lunch and realize your wallet is in your other pants. Or maybe you left your keys at home. The problem is organization. You need one place for everything, like a magic pocket. Putting something in the magic pocket means it's always there, no matter what you wear or where you are. The same thing is true for computers. If you have more than one, keeping track of all of your files can be a pain. Solving this problem is one of the big ideas behind Dropbox. It's like a magic pocket, a single, secure place for all of your stuff. Let's meet Josh, who is preparing for a big trip to Africa. Right now, all of his trip info is spread across his laptop, desktop, and phone. He needs to consolidate it all and is tired of having to email files to himself or move them around with a USB drive. Then he found Dropbox, which creates a new kind of folder on his computers. These folders work hard to be exactly alike, even across Macs and PCs. By adding his itinerary to his laptop Dropbox, he can be sure the same file will show up in his desktop Dropbox and even on his phone. The same thing happens when he saves a document in a Dropbox folder. The document gets updated across all of his Dropboxes. But it's not just his computers. The Dropbox website also works to be exactly like his other Dropboxes. Anything he puts in Dropbox is available on the website automatically. This way, if his Jeep takes a dive and his computer is ruined, he can still get to his files on the Dropbox website, where they're always backed up. As it turns out, Josh's Safari was a success, and his laptop made it home with lots of videos and photos to share. Instead of emailing everything, he just shared a Dropbox folder with his mom, so she could get copies of photos she wants to frame. Because it worked so well for travel, Josh made Dropbox the home for all of his stuff, so it's accessible anytime, wherever he goes. Whether you're traveling the world, running a business, or simply organizing your life, Dropbox means you can stop worrying about managing files and backups and get on with your next adventure. You can download Dropbox now at Dropbox.com.
So that's the exact point that we were trying to discuss is you were trying to identify a problem and he was trying to solve that problem. And he had an assumption, or there was a kind of a question mark whether people would use my product. So how do I measure that? Instead of coming out with a product and then asking them whether people would use it or not, was a quick way was coming out with the video and then asking them how many people registered, how many people are trying to use this trial version, and then coming out with a kind of a MVP kind of product. So that is one kind of MVP called video MVP. That's all that we are talking about. The other one is kind of what we call it as concierge minimum MVP. So what do we mean by concierge is till we have a kind of an assumption that needs to be validated, there's no point spending time on coming out with a developed product. So you can make sure that you don't cater to everybody with the customer segment, but you cater to a few number of people. And then you try to understand their problem. And it's more about a manual human intervention that happens and trying to solve that problem. But the point here is to learn about the customer, to observe their behavior, and to make a good product, a better product. But we are not focusing on multiple customers. We are just trying to focus on some customers there. And it's a kind of a manual human intervention that what we are trying to deliver as a solution to that problem. So that is called a concierge minimum viable product. There's an app called Food on the Table. So their kind of motto is to give you kind of diet plans, to give you your meal plans, to find out near your place which is the grocery which has discounts. Based on the discounts, you come out with a kind of a grocery list, plan for your menu, and make sure that your dinner is ready or your lunch is ready. So their kind of focusing was on how to give a meal plan to the customer based on his needs, based on his locality of what the grocery sell there and which is much cheaper there, which product we can buy and which product we don't need to buy. So it's kind of a meal planner that what they are trying to. So when they started this, they did not come out with any kind of fancy kind of apps or products. They started looking at a kind of a single customer or kind of a simple set of customers where the team literally went to their house, started understanding what their needs are, what their likes are. Then they started kind of catering to this is what is the grocery list that you need to have. This is what you need to plan for if we are looking at this kind of a diet. So they were trying to attack a problem directly through a kind of an human intervention, and their scope of delivery was for a simple set of customers, and they were not looking at a larger set of customers for a simple reason that they just wanted to learn about the customer, make sure they understand about the behaviors, refine their product. Once they are refined, they would come to have as an automated product. So that is how food on the table came about. So the focus here is to see a small set of customers, and it's more of a kind of a manual intervention that happens, no kind of fancy apps. That was the first start that they did. And today it's a kind of an app that what you can a plan for a meal or fun for a lunch. So that's the point. The focus is here about how you directly interact with the customer rather than a kind of an online product, wasting time on that without understanding the customer. There's no point coming out with a product where the customer would actually not use. So what they learned from this personal interactions or manual intervention was they learned about the customer, his likes and dislikes. That helped them to make up kind of a better product. And the focus was on a small set of people. And this is typically for an initial setup. And it's not a kind of a scaled setup. That we call that as a concierge minimum viable product. The another one is called Wizard of Oz kind of, where it is something like a search engine like a Google, right? Now, if I go to Google and kind of ask, who was the first guy who climbed Mount Everest? It would be able to answer me, this is the guy who came out. But if I ask a question like these are kind of social search engines, right? If we ask, where do I get the best dosas out near my places? It's a kind of a relative question, right? There's no kind of a right answer for this question. Each one would say something, and there's no right or wrong answers for these kind of questions. The first question was more direct. There are two ways of answering it. We pretty much know who was the one who had to climb the Mount Everest first. But for the second question of where do I get good dosas around near my place? Each one would have different kind of taste. Each one would like a different hotel. So there'll be different answers altogether. So, so for these kind of questions or queries, there was a kind of a search engine called Aardwork. What they did was they specialized in these kind of social search kind of questions. Initially, what they did was, though they had a kind of a search engine and any questions that are being asked, at the background, what happened was it was a kind of a human manual intervention that happened. Okay, I am from Chennai. I am asking a question, where is the best place to eat good dosas? So they had some kind of an IM network kind of a thing where typical WhatsApp, where they had people employed to find out what is the best place to eat near Chennai. What is the best place to eat dosas in Mumbai, right? So each one had a particular locality, and it was kind of, they didn't have a kind of a database, but they had some kind of manual human interventions to answer these kind of queries. But the customer will not be knowing that these are kind of a manual background effect that what is happening out. For him, it's a kind of a question that is being asked and it's being answered that you can go to these n number of places in Mumbai to have good dosas. So this is some kind of an MVP where though it is manual interventions are happening. It is kind of masked, but that was not the case. The customer knew very well in concierge minimum viable product where it's more about manual effort that is happening. But in the Wizard OZ kind of uh, MVPs, that's not the case. You had a question and that is being answered. It's being masked, but it's a kind of a human manual intervention that happens. That's how they started this social engineering. And once they were able to collect a lot of databases, then they made it to a database and the manual intervention got cut out of. Later, Aardwork was bought by Google. That's how they started having these kind of MVPs. So the point here is you don't need to have a ready-made product as an MVP is the point that we are trying to look at. Everything is a small idea. We put that to test, and MVP is not a kind of a final destination. It keeps evolving. We got to do a course correction. It's not a picture perfect MVP. So it's not a final one, right? So each time you deliver an MVP, we learn about the customer more. It's not about technology. It's not about the architecture. It's not about the design. But we learn more about the customer, his likes, his dislikes, and then we try to make the product better. So there are multiple ways of creating an MVP is the point that I am trying to focus on. And it is not just a piece of code that what we are looking at. So we first looked at the learn part, then we started looking at the build part. Build could be either an experiment where it's a quick win situation, and MVP is more about a kind of a full-fledged one the customer would look. It would take some time, but either an experiment or an MVP is all considered an assumption that's being put to test. And then we are trying to come out with a validated learning. And the learning is what we are trying to measure as a team. So how do I know whether a product is going in the right direction, right? So you come out with an experiment or you come out with an MVP. You create some kind of a baselines. And then you try to iteratively, incrementally start moving around. So what's the measure that we do, right? It's not about time. It's not about the cost, whether I've completed it on time, cost. It's not about feature completions. It's not about task completions. That's not the measure that what we are looking at. We're looking at how many people logged in, how many people got registered today, how many people visited iPage, what is the conversion rate. So these are kind of metrics that we look at. And based on these metrics, either I pivot or persevere. So either I do a course correction or stay put there and proceed with the thing. So the metrics that what you're looking at is kind of one way of looking at these kind of metrics is where there's no kind of a time period, right? So how many people, kind of total number of people got registered, total number of people who got logged in, how many people kind of visited my page. But the point is, this metrics would not be kind of meaningful one simply because I will not be able to take any action out of it. There's no point knowing how many people visited my page. I just cannot take any action out of it, or just cannot get any meeting out of it. But what if we have a metrics like, say, for example, this month, this many number of people got logged in. This month, this many people got registered. That's the metric that I can look at and take kind of course corrections. So that is called a kind of a cohort analysis where we are trying to classify the data and we're not looking at the totals, rather looking at a subdivision of it. What is the age group of people who have started looking at registering or logged into my product? So this I can, from these kind of data where I'm trying to classify this data, I would be able to take course correction, make actionable items or corrections during the next way of evolving as a product, right? Do some kind of an A/B testing. You have two ways of looking at a screen, right? So you give two views of a particular screen and then test that with different customers. Some 50% of the customers would view a different view of that page. Another 50% of, say, the customers would view a different page. try to get a feedback or observation from that. So from that, try to judge, okay, this plan B looked more, it was more useful for the customer. So let's go with the second way of how the page was viewed. So we are trying to test the waters, trying to give two scenarios to the customer and try to test this waters and see which they liked, rather than we assuming that this is the way of how the customer would love to look at a particular screen or view and then go ahead with that kind of dashboard stuff. So one is a kind of a vanity metrics where we give a kind of a total numbers which doesn't convey anything to me as a product developer, but rather if we are able to kind of classify this data as this age group for this month, for today, these many number of logged in people have come in, these many number of people have visited my site, these many people have got registered. So this is what we are looking at, and we are looking at different flavors of how we view the workflow, we view the particular screen, test this around and see which they like, and then go accordingly, trying to do a kind of a course correction. That's how we try to kind of pivot or persevere. So Wealthfront, okay, this is a kind of an online retail platform where people can manage their wealth. That's the basic idea. When they started this, they started moving towards kind of lean startup methodology. Before moving to lean start methodology of how to develop products, they came out with two platforms for a different purpose. One was more about creating a game, right? So whoever joins this, you don't need to pay any money. It was a kind of a free version where you behaved like a fund manager. So you logged in and you behaved like a fund manager where you would sell shares, create your own portfolios. And there is a kind of a score of who's a better kind of fund manager. But believe me, you didn't pay anything. It was a kind of a game where people started playing with money. It's more about a kind of a game where I sold shares, bought shares, created my own portfolio, how much wealth I created without paying a single penny. That was one thing. The other one was a kind of a paid version where there were real portfolio managers. They helped to increase your wealth. They guided your wealth. There are two kind of platforms. The first platform goal was, why did they create this kind of gamification was, from this they thought there would be some kind of fund manager who would get born, and he would love to play this role and become an actual fund manager at a later stage. At the same time, there'll be some persons who played this role and found out that they're kind of lousy kind of fund managers. I need help. So I'll have to go to these kind of paid versions and get the experts help. So they wanted to look at it two ways. One, we create more fund managers. The other one was, no, I'm not able to manage my funds or manage my wealth. Wouldn't I get help support from real fund managers? So there'll be increase in both these counts is what their assumption was. But in reality, what happened was, in either of these platforms, there are a lot of people who use this game or a free version, but they played it lousy. There were no kind of real fund managers who learned that art and came out as a fund manager. There's not even a single fund manager who came out of it. In the paid version, nobody liked it, or there are a kind of negligible number of users who actually use the paid version. So on both these accounts, their assumption failed. And more importantly, any customer was confused which is the free version, which is the paid version. That was something that what people got confused. So based on these observations, based on all these tests that they put, they tried to pivot. First thing was to shelve the free version, to shelve that platform one of free version. The second version was kind of a more meaningful paid version where we get help from real fund managers. It's a kind of a, you don't put money and they give you money out of it. That's not the case here, where you co-partner, work on a daily basis with the fund manager, know what he is trying to do. At the same time, they try to guide your wealth. So by this, what happened was when they started pivoting, they got lot number of people. Today, they have around 10 million users and they manage around 80 billion assets of wealth. So simply because they had an assumption, they quickly put that to test. They learned about the customer that this is not working. They did a course correction is the focus that we are trying to talk about of how quickly they pivoted. And today they are they have around 1 million users and they manage around 80 billions of assets. So that's how we pivot or persevere in a product. Now, there are different ways of how we do the kind of course correction, right? Everybody knows there's an online platform called Slack. It's a kind of an IM network that's being used. But when they started that product, they started it as a game. They created a game called Glitch, and it was more for a Gen Z kind of people. They started creating a game. While they were developing this game, they thought within this development community, there needs to be some kind of an communication tool that needs to be done. So they then did a kind of an internal tool, which was an internal communication tool to communicate between themselves within their development team. But their focus was to create a game. At the same time, they wanted to communicate within the team members. So they created a kind of an online chat. Once they started doing this, they developed this game and deployed it. There was nobody who got or started using this name game called Glitch. But surprisingly, what they understood was without knowingly or unknowingly, they created a tool called a communication tool, which they helped in interacting within the team members that they found was more beneficial to the user. They thought that would be beneficial to the users. So the first focus was on a kind of a customer segment who were people of Gen Z cadre. That was their focus. They thought they would create a game. But knowingly or unknowingly, they created a tool which was working more better than this game, and that might help to solve that problem. That's how Slack got evolved. So today, they moved from a Gen Z kind of a customer to an organization team where the organization start using this Slack kind of communication tool. So that was the pivot. Earlier, their focus was on Gen Z customer. Then they moved and they had a course correction for an official purpose communication tool towards the organization. So you plan for a particular kind of customers, but you think that the tool or the product is not working accordingly. So I'll have to do a course correction. So that's the learning that Slack learned, and they did a course correction. And today, most of the organizations, before Teams were being used, Slack was something that commonly used as a communication tool. The next kind of pivot is more about uh, how do customers actually move their needs. YouTube was first developed as a dating platform where they thought they would upload videos related to dating. But surprisingly, that platform was not used for dates. Rather, people were trying to upload their personal videos, their hobbies, their tour travel, all that stuff. So they found that there is a space for these kind of people. They moved from a dating platform to a kind of a more of a video sharing platform. So they had a problem. They tried to test it out. They tried to deploy it as a product, but later they have come to know that they are not trying to solve the exact problem. They needed a kind of a video sharing platform where anybody could share videos, and rather than a kind of a dating platform. They thought dating, there are other sites to do kind of a dating kind of activities, but they thought this platform is more about sharing their personal hobbies, personal travel, all that stuff. So they moved from one problem to the other customer need is what we are talking about, a kind of a shift that what we were talking about. The third one is more about the architecture. When you had a problem, you were trying to solve that particular problem is what a product is getting evolved, right? So IBM predominantly was a kind of an hardware manufacturer. But the problem there was it was of very low margins but high volume trade. As numbers, it did not help in IBM being a profitable organization. So they need to have a shift, right? So they need to have a shift. They gave a shift from an hardware kind of support to a kind of a consulting kind of services, cloud, AI, hybrid, software as a service. So they started looking at how they can evolve as a company by providing software as a service, cloud technology, more about consultancy. So they did a kind of a pivot in the way of how they handled a particular problem. So these are some kind of examples or the way of how companies thought about a problem, they try to attack it, but they had to pivot, make sure that the product succeeds more importantly than anything else. So that's the focus that we are looking at. So we were looking at first in terms of learning about the customer, not about the technology, not about the design. Then we came out with some kind of small experiments, or it could be an MVP quickly. And then we tried to measure. We did not measure in terms of cost. We did not measure in terms of features. We did not measure in terms of time, but we measured in terms of the learning about the customer. How well I understood the customer. Am I attacking the real problem? Am I trying to solve the problem as a product? Right? That's the focus, that three kind of cycles, the life cycles that we were talking about. So now we have come to the fag end where how do I scale this up? Uh, we were talking about these three cycles, right? More importantly, in this lean startup methodology is all about how quickly I pass through these three cycles, how quickly I move and complete that one particular cycle. That's the focus here. So we are talking about small batches. We talked about this turbo tax where just before one tax season starts, they will do a kind of a large rollout of deployment that happens, and there'll be no kind of rollouts happening after that. They moved away from it and started looking at small batches, trying to learn about the customer, try to iteratively or incrementally evolve the product is the focus. Now, why do I need to do it in small batches? It's a typical example. It's a kind of a child's play. There's an activity that was given to children where you had an envelope, you had a letter. All that they had to do was there were about 1,000 envelopes, 1,000 letters separately filed up. So all these two group of children groups has to do is they had separated this into two subgroups of children where they were trying to look at how do I post this envelope. Take the letter, fold it, put it inside the envelope, stamp it, post it around. So they were trying to find out which team would do it first or which team would do it at a much faster rate. There are two ways of doing this activity. One is I first fold that letter for all the 1,000 letters, keep it separately. Then for all these 1,000 letters, put that inside an envelope. Then stick the envelope, put a stamp, do it. So each time you're trying to fold all the letters separately, put that separately inside an envelope, stick that envelope, put the stamp, and keep it. That's one way of looking at it. The other way is you fold one letter, try to see whether that letter fits into the envelope, stick that envelope, put a stamp to it, finish it. The second way is a kind of an ideal way where we get kind of feedback loops, right? I first try to see whether the letter gets into the envelope, whether I'm able to post it, whether I'm able to stick it. You complete one simple cycle. This is all that we are talking about, an iterative way where you do the right amount of design, you do get the right amount of requirement, you do a small amount of testing, you do a small amount of development. Just the small amount iteratively is what the second team did. They were able to post more letters than the first team simply because they were looking at small batches, completing it to a full. So they did not take the letter for all the 1,000, fold it, then later they did not put it inside envelope. Rather, they did a little bit of development, little bit of requirement finding, little bit of design, little bit of testing, and they came out with a feedback whether I'm able to put that letter inside the envelope, stamp, stick, whether I'm able to do it. So that's the point that we are looking at is look at small batches, look at cross-functional teams. How quickly we are trying to get into feedback cycles is all about scaling up things. So the takeaway here, right? So if we will have to make better products, the measure that whether we are going in the right direction is, are we knowing about the customer? Am I building the right product? Is the customer loves the product? Is what we are looking at, is the learning factor, is the best metric to find out whether we are going in the right direction. What is the learning that you get of it? All that are assumptions. Anything that you do before the MVP or anything that you do before the experiment is just an assumption. It need not be right at all. So we put that to test and we validate whether the assumption works or not. So remember the Zappos guy, he did not create a fancy kind of app or fancy products. He just wanted to first understand, will the people really buy shoes online? Took a small snap out of it, uploaded it. People did not know that he is doing it manually, but he just wanted to had a he wanted to clarify whether people would buy my product online. So that was what that we are talking about. We don't need to have an picture perfect product, but we got to validate our ideas. Ideas are more important than the actual product, but the ideas needs to come evolve and it should go through this learn, build, measure cycle. How quickly we do is all that we are trying to look at. More importantly, we are looking at metrics about not about time, not about cost, or not about kind of feature completions or task completions. Rather, from that metric, will I be able to take some actions? I know for this month, this is the number of people who have registered. This is much lesser than the baseline. What do I need to do? I'll be able to take an action. Rather, you have a kind of a total number of people registered. I will not be able to get any meaning out of it. I will not be able to do any kind of course correction. So we're looking at how early we are trying to learn about the customer. It's more about a kind of a demonstrable truth about the customer, how quickly we move through this lean build measure cycle. And it's all about the metrics that we are looking at is more about learning. So learning is the metrics that we need to look at when we try to develop a better product is all my takeaway from this session. So any questions? So this session was from the book called Lean Startup from Eric Rice. You can have a look at it, but this is just the basic synopsis, and the whole idea is how to make a kind of a better product out of it. So that's the point that I was trying to focus on. Any questions?